Two Aussies, same age, same $27,000 HECS debt, same $2,000 in the bank at the end of the month. One puts it on the loan, the other puts it in an ETF. 10 years later, one of them is roughly $40,000 ahead. Guess which? Because most people guess wrong. Since June 2026, the HECS indexation rate is 2.8%, the lowest since 2021. Meanwhile, the ASX has averaged around 9% a year over 3 decades. So the math says invest, and most people stop there. But the math doesn't tell the whole story. Here's what changes the answer. According to the ATO, more than 3 million Australians carry a HECS-HELP debt. The combined balance sits above $78 billion. The average outstanding balance after last year's 20% government cut is around $27,600. On 1 June 2026, every one of those debts grew by 2.8% indexed at the lower of CPI or Wage Price Index, capped by the Universities Accord Act of 2025. The compulsory repayment threshold jumped to $69,528 for 2026 to 27. Below that, you pay nothing. Above it, 15 cents in the dollar comes off, calculated only on the income above the threshold. The system is softer and cheaper than it's been in a decade, which is exactly why the old advice about paying it off aggressively no longer holds up. The first thing to name is why this question keeps coming up. Every June, 3 million Aussies get a text or an email that their HECS balance just grew. It never feels good. And every year, finance forums fill with the same fight. Pay it down early, or leave it alone and invest the difference. For years, the answer was clear. Then, the rules changed. The next thing to name is that the old advice is now wrong for most people. Between 2020 and 2023, HECS indexation ranged from 1.8 to 7.1%. When it hit 7.1 in 2023, every finance influencer told you to smash the balance. That advice was right then. It's not right now. Since 2023, the rules cap indexation at the lower of CPI or wages. The 2024 rate landed at 4.7, then 3.2 in 2025, then 2.8 this year. The debt is now growing slower than most people's salaries. That single change flips the maths. So why do most Aussies still get this wrong? 2 reasons. First, HECS emotionally feels like a mortgage. Debt is uncomfortable. Watching a balance disappear feels like progress. But HECS isn't a mortgage. It doesn't charge interest, doesn't hit your credit rating, doesn't ever get chased legally. It just quietly grows at inflation. Second, most advice online is copied from a market where indexation was 3 points higher. A HECS holder in 2023 got different maths than one in 2026. The rules changed. The behavior didn't catch up. That's the gap this video closes. Here's the framework that actually answers the question. Whether to pay HECS or invest comes down to 3 factors, in order. Factor 1. The difference between indexation and your investment return after tax. Factor 2. Whether you plan to buy a house in the next 5 years. Factor 3. Whether you have salary, sacrifice, access at work. That's it. Ignore anything else. If those 3 factors line up one way, invest. If they line up the other, pay it off. 2 of these 3 factors have nothing to do with the maths of returns, which is why people who only look at percentages get it wrong. HECS doesn't just take money out of your pocket. It also shows up on your loan application, and it changes what your employer can legally do for your tax bill. The person who thinks about all 3 ends up $10,000 to $50,000 ahead of the person who thinks about only one. Here's each factor with real numbers. Factor 1 is the pure investment maths, and this one is actually the easiest. HECS indexation in 2026, 2.8%. Long-run ASX 200 return with dividends reinvested, around 9% a year over 30 years per Vanguard's index chart. Long-run global shares in Australian dollars around 10. So on the numbers alone, every dollar you don't put on HECS earns you roughly 6 percentage points more each year once you've held the investment long enough to smooth out crashes. But there's a catch that most explanations miss. When you sell those ETFs eventually, you pay capital gains tax. If you're on the 37% marginal rate, half the gain is taxed at 37%, an effective 18.5% hit. Your after-tax return drops to around 7.5%. Compared to a 2.8% HECS indexation, you're still ahead by nearly 5 points a year. But the gap is narrower than most people say, and it only shows up if you actually stay invested for more than a decade. Factor 2 is where most Aussies get blindsided. HECS destroys your borrowing capacity. When you apply for a home loan, banks include your compulsory HECS repayment in their servicing calculation as a hard expense. For every $10,000 of HECS debt, most lenders knock roughly $50,000 to $70,000 off your maximum borrow. If you're carrying 20 grand, that's $100,000 to $140,000 less house. In a Sydney or Melbourne market where every 100 grand of borrowing changes the suburbs you can afford, that's not academic. That's the difference between homes. Take a graduate on 90 grand a year with 25,000 of HECS and a 20% deposit. Bank 1 offers 700 grand at that debt level. Pay off the HECS in a lump sum and the same bank now offers $80,000 of extra borrowing unlocked by paying down what looked like cheap debt. If you plan to buy in the next 2 years, this factor alone flips the recommendation. Even though the HECS math says invest, the mortgage math says pay it off first. The answer changed. Factor 3 is the option almost no one uses. Employer-paid HECS repayments through salary packaging. If your employer is a public hospital, university, charity, or public benevolent institution, you can salary sacrifice a lump sum toward HECS out of pre-tax income. That means your marginal tax rate, 37 or 45%, becomes an immediate saving on every dollar sent to the debt. For a nurse earning 100 grand, salary sacrificing 5,000 to HECS costs them roughly 3,200 after tax. That's a return on the day it's paid of over 50%. No ETF matches that. If you have access, this beats both alternatives. If you don't, ignore it. But check with payroll first. Most people who could use this option don't know they can. Here's the 10-year picture. 2 graduates, both with 25,000 HECS, both with an extra $300 a month to deploy. Graduate A puts it on the loan every month until it's gone. Graduate B invests it in a diversified ETF instead. Ignore mortgages for a second, ignore salary sacrifice. Just the pure indexation versus market question. What happens in a decade? Graduate A clears the debt in about 6 years. Then invests the same $300 a month for the last 4. By year 10, roughly $17,000 in an ETF. Graduate B invests the whole time while HECS ticks over at 2.8%. Their HECS balance in year 10 is 32 grand, up from 25. Their investment portfolio? Around 58,000 at a 7% net return. Net position, 58 minus 32 is 26 grand ahead of Graduate A. On the maths alone, Invest wins by around 9 grand. But here's where Invest can lose. Markets don't return 7% every year, they average it. The last 30 years have seen 4 separate periods where the ASX dropped more than 20% in a single year. If your 10-year window includes a big drawdown in year 9 or 10 and you need the cash in year 11, you crystallize the loss. Meanwhile, HECS indexation is guaranteed. Every June, small and inevitable. There's no volatility. If you can't emotionally hold through a crash, don't invest. Pay the guaranteed thing off and sleep. There's a second scenario people don't game out. What if you take unpaid leave, have a child, get made redundant, or drop below the threshold? Your income falls, your compulsory HECS repayment stops, and the debt just sits there, indexing at 2.8% a year, growing for as long as you're not earning. If you'd already invested that money, it keeps compounding. If you'd already paid off the HECS, it's just gone. For anyone with fluctuating income freelancers, parents, career changers, Invest ties the money up but keeps it yours. Pay off and it's spent. So here's the verdict. Built as a decision tree, not a rule. If you're buying a house in the next 2 years, pay HECS off first. The borrowing math beats the investment math. If your employer offers salary sacrifice for HECS, use that before either alternative. The 50% tax return is unbeatable. Otherwise, invest and let HECS index quietly. That's the framework the 2.8% world actually requires. Most Aussies pick one of those 3 answers by feeling and get the wrong one. And the 2 graduates from the start? The one 40 grand ahead a decade later was the one who knew which of the 3 factors applied to them and acted on it. The other one just picked the answer that felt safer. It felt right for years. It cost them 40 grand. Give this video a like if it changed how you think about your HECS debt. Subscribe for weekly Aussie money breakdowns. See you in the next one.